Welcome to Name 3 Songs. I'm Sarah Fagan.
I'm Jenna Million, and this is a podcast where we discuss feminist issues in music and pop culture, all while empowering fangirls.
Because let's be honest, fangirls knew about that band way before you did.
So, today, we have some fun stuff, and we have some very heavy stuff. We're going to be getting into all of our fangirl moments from Coachella. We're also going to be talking about some kind of serious news issues and just general America, because we have this platform and we feel like it's important to bring awareness and attention to these things with you all. And then we're getting into kind of Frank Ocean's Coachella set, what happens, why fans are mad, the context around his performance, and that eventually leading to him dropping out of Weekend 2. And then we're also going to be talking about a death that happened this week in the K-pop community, and we're going to be talking about fan grief. So there's also sensitive kind of subjects happening this week. We do want to recommend that you listen with caution if this is a subject that's sensitive for you. And we are going to be putting timestamps over on our Instagram stories. So if you want to go over our stories, check it out. We'll put it there, and we'll also save it as a highlight. So if there's anything you want to skip, you can check those timestamps out there. So with all that being said, Sarah, what's our fangirl moments of the week?
So while I'm not necessarily the biggest fan of the Shawn Mendes and Camilla Cabello relationship, I am obsessed with...
A fan of the drama?
I'm a fan of the drama. I am nosy and I love gossip and I'm obsessed with the drama.
Oh my god.
Because I honestly most of the time forget that both of these people exist, and then randomly I'll see a TikTok video of Shawn Mendes doing something and I'm like, he's such a silly boy. He's so silly.
Oh my god. Wait, that video of Teffy where he's on an Instagram live and he's like, hi guys, and Teffy's like, shut up, don't look at me, shut up, I'll be your girlfriend, fine.
I know, that was everything. Literally though, I'm just what is with this man? He's just high camp, everything he does, and he doesn't mean, I don't think he means to be, and I'm just you're amazing. It's just so funny. Do I know a single Shawn Mendes song? No. Do I love him with my whole heart? Yes. Do I love that he and Camilla Cabello just don't care about the whole world being these two are fucking messy, because they were just kissing in the VIP section of Coachella last weekend.
There were so many POVs of them, essentially, so many videos of them together.
There's so many videos. Guys, go over to the show notes on our site to watch some of these, because it's just so funny. They were seen holding hands and kissing, and it's just funny because in one of the videos that I saw that a fan posted, it's they're flirting so much and you kind of see the moment of wait, should we? And then just Camilla just going for it. And I'm you go, girl. You get what you want. I'm here for you. God.
It's really funny because it's in probably 2012 or 2013 era. I just remember being on Tumblr and the it couple of Coachella was always Vanessa Hudgens and Austin Butler. Yeah. They were always the it couple. I always wanted to know what she was wearing. And now it might be Camilla Cabello and Shawn Mendes.
I'm just I'm so obsessed with it. It's so funny. Also, just because their relationship has always been funny to me, because they did that duet when they first started where they were we're just best friends, there's absolutely no sexual tension here, and I'm there's at least sexual tension from one of you, meaning Camilla Cabello. And their whole relationship has obviously been an interesting talking point because of everybody's assumptions about Shawn Mendes and what he does in his free time,
and their relationship feeling very PR in the sense that they went on coffee walks, coffee paparazzi walks every single day of COVID
with their empty coffee mugs, just looking so bored. Yeah, everything about it has just always felt really a little bit sus, and so it's just funny that they're acting just normal exes at a music festival that maybe took a little bit too many drugs and just decided to make out in public.
They're living their best lives.
But then a day or two later they were seen holding hands strolling down the streets of Venice, and it was just a random Australian journalist who just happened to be at a restaurant, saw them walking down the street. But it's so funny because I literally can't watch a video of Shawn and Camilla walking holding hands without feeling it's a weird zombie pap walk.
Yeah.
Because even just watching it, I'm oh, they just walk like that. That's just how they exist. That's just how they exist. And so now I also just like have in my head of like, oh, like, I wonder if like people, younger celebrities have been trained so much to like walk slowly for a good paparazzi photo that like that's just what they do.
Oh my god.
Like, is that just their default? Just in case.
I just feel like they're just an interesting case study. Stay tuned to find out more. Like, I feel like that's all I can say.
Yeah, I think that's all there is to it. But that was my highlight. And also Kendall Jenner watching Bad Bunny perform and acting like she maybe could sing in Spanish was also funny.
My personal favorite celebrity couple, as I mentioned previously, we got more news at Coachella. Rosalia was performing. This is so funny. So Rauw Alejandro is her fiance. They recently did an EP together of 3 songs. He was in Texas, like during Coachella weekend. And I was like, oh my God, like what if Rosalia like flies from LA to Austin where he's doing a show and she comes out at the Austin show because I was going. But then I was like, dum-dum, like no, of course he was going to be at Coachella because that's like a way cooler place for him to make an appearance. So during Rosalia's set, which also like she's just very incredible, like creative vision artist. He came out and they did Beso and Vampiros together, and it was so cute. I'm like, they're literally so cute. It's disgusting. Like they did, I told you, they did this Billboard interview together. It's so cute. It's disgusting. I love them very much. I also got to see Rauw in concert last weekend, and it was so cool. And I'm just like, we need more pop stars who are dancers, like, because it was so much fun. So that was like my highlight of Coachella, as well as just Charlie XCX being iconic as per usual. Yeah. She brought out Troye Sivan, which like love, and then she did the Welcome to My Island remix, and she like did the Macarena during the song.
My favorite video from her set was when Troy came on the stage and she was like, wow, Troy, you look so sexy. And it sounded like in those 90s songs where they used to have like the talking over moments, and I was like, that was iconic. And then he like kept singing, and then he like giggled and was like, you too, Charles. And I was like, oh, I can't.
Oh, they're so cute. We also had Muna at Coachella, first just bringing out Phoebe Bridgers for a song, and then the rest of Boy Genius appeared and they did Silk Chiffon. So gays everywhere quaking in their boots.
Watching the video on TikTok was so fun because they brought Phoebe out, which made complete sense. And then Julian Baker and Lucy Dacus came out too. And I was like, now it's just like drunk queer girly karaoke at this point, because they're just like all singing on top of each other. And I was like, nobody knows what's happening anymore.
Oh my God. And then, of course, we have Blackpink making history as the first K-pop act to headline Coachella. And we got a lot of content from Lisa, like being super fans of everyone. She posted photos with like Dominic Fike and Billie Eilish. And then Rosalia posted that she was hanging out with Lisa during the week while they were both in LA, and they like went to a museum and like got hot dogs and stuff. And I was like, oh my God, this is so cool. And then I saw somebody on TikTok talking about how like they are 2 powerhouses from like obviously like Spanish and like Latin culture, and then K-pop, who are like both like not American. And it's just like the power of them 2 existing together is like insane. And I'm like, drop the track when. We also had Billie Eilish making a surprise performance for a new song with Labyrinth. There was lots of surprise performances. I think The Weeknd also did a surprise appearance during someone's set, and then Jackson Wang, who's also from the K-pop world, was performing, and I like forgot he was even on the Coachella lineup. I like Jackson Wang, also just like an artist who has like such a vision. He's so cool. He brought out Ciara, and they did 1-2 step, and like this is what I saw on TikTok. It was like they were singing 1-2 step, and I was like, what is happening? Like, in what world is this collab happening? And then like in the comments I was like, oh, they have a song coming out together, so then they also performed their song together. But I was just like, the worlds colliding in my brain was like not computing. I was like, there's too much happening here. Like, I think overall, like, review of Coachella weekend 1, we got a lot of fun things to talk about, so we'll see what happens for weekend 2.
It's also just funny because like I feel like for so many years Coachella was so much about like the influencer event of it all and like the A-list celeb moment of it all, that like sometimes I literally forget that it's a music thing. And so the fact that like the music kind of actually be the star of the show this year was like a very nice like new thing for me, like experiencing like the pop culture discussion around Coachella not being focused on like what Kendall Jenner was wearing as much as it was focused on like the music for once.
That's definitely true. with discussing all the fun things at Coachella, we also just wanted to take a moment to talk about some of the more serious topics that are happening in America right now, because this week was kind of insane. And while we're not going to spend too much time on it, we do just want to like bring it to people's attention, because like America is slowly sliding maybe into fascism. Yeah. But I would say the thing that stood out to me most this week is that there were 4 instances of gun violence, like literally just negligent gun violence. Of like, there was an instance of a black teenager who went to the wrong house to pick up his younger brothers. He was shot and killed. There was a...
No, he wasn't killed.
I thought he was.
Survived. No, he literally, if the bullet had been like an inch or 2 over, no, he's gonna make a full recovery.
Oh my God. Okay. Yeah. Well then, we have it here. There was a girl who was driving to a party and went down the driveway of the wrong address. She was shot, basically being on the wrong person's property. Then there was in Texas at a literally at a HEB, like grocery store. These cheerleaders like were accidentally like trying to get into the wrong car. They were shot. And then I thought like this all happened within 24 hours. And then there was another one of like these kids playing in a yard, and their ball went into the neighbor's yard, and they went over to get it, and like they were shot at. Like literally in this, all of this is so like incomprehensible. Like it feels like this was made up. And I think like it really was so shocking to me this week to hear all of this news of like none of these things should have happened, like period. And it's like, I think everyone, obviously a lot of division in this country, rooted in a lot of racism and a lot of white supremacy, if we're going to call it out for what it is. Yeah. But like everyone is so distrusting of each other. And I think also like even for our generation coming up, like we have a lot to be afraid about. Yeah. Like we have like our whole lives were like, don't talk to strangers. Like, you know, only play outside if like an adult's watching you. And then like we have the onlineness of it all. If it's like people like doxing each other and doing death threats online. I think our generation too is very distrusting of like being scared to exist as an adult in this world. And I think like a lot of like white supremacists are very distrusting of literally everyone. And coupled with how easy to get a gun it is, like it is so scary that all of these people made accidents and suffered gunshots because of it. Yeah. That should not be a reality.
I saw another story about somebody just like at like a Walmart or a store like that thinking someone was shoplifting and just shooting them. And it's like, since when is shoplifting like a shootable offense? And there are all these states who are like loosening up gun laws of like who can open carry and that sort of thing. And it's just like, it's so scary to me, and it's so wild to me because like my parents have met so many people who like when they tell them like, oh yeah, my daughter lives in New York City, they're like, oh, New York City's so dangerous. And it's like, literally I feel safer here than I think I would feel in any other state in the country, just based off of like gun laws and like what you can and can't get away with. But I mean, it's so insane. And I saw this really interesting TikTok actually, and I've seen people talking about this before, but about the fact that like up until the 80s it was like very, very common for paint to be lead based, and that so most homes had lead in them, and so most people who were in those homes have some degree of lead poisoning, and that lead poisoning is known to leading to like anger issues and acts of violence. And there's been studies and stuff into like also why there were a lot of serial killers during like the 70s and 80s. Damn. And like how that could pertain to lead poisoning. Wow. Yeah, because I mean like there was like lead in so much stuff, like even like jewelry and all these things that like people had on them like at all times. And so people were just like truly poisoning themselves with lead constantly. And so it was one video, and there were a bunch of like other people stitching this video who were like psychologists or doctors or all this stuff, and being like, yeah, this makes so much sense, like this is a completely valid thing, and that apparently there is like research being put into this. And why also like now if you get like a lease for an apartment and there's lead paint in that apartment, like it states that there might be lead paint in your apartment. And so I just think that it's really interesting, like terrifying, but interesting that most of the people who are doing these shootings are in the generations that would have suffered from lead poisoning.
Yeah, that's horrific to think about on top of everything else we get to think about.
I know, right?
And one of those things that just goes to show the division in this country, and kind of what Sarah was just mentioning, is that As of March, Texas Republicans introduced a bill that would give some citizens authority to arrest migrants who illegally cross the border. Yeah, don't we love to see it? There's also, in Missouri, the Attorney General created a website for neighbors to report gender transitions that you have observed. This is what I'm talking about: distrust and literally and surveillance.
It's giving
this comes down to surveillance also, like spying on your neighbors. Like,
it's giving Nazi Germany, because that's what they were told to do. It's like, oh, you see a little Jew around, round him up, let us know. Like, it's so scary.
It is so scary. Maybe in some slightly lighter news, we do have BuzzFeed News is no more. And a lot of people were making jokes on the internet about like, oh, bye-bye listicles. But it's like, actually, BuzzFeed News has gotten like a lot of awards for the reporting that they've done. And I've seen a lot of journalists like coming to the defense of BuzzFeed News. BuzzFeed, just like general pop culture listicles, obviously very different from like the reporting side of it. And I think this goes hand in hand with like the verified checks on Twitter going away, of it's like, who are we trusting as a news source?
Yeah.
And also like, where are we looking to find these news sources? Because journalists are like losing their jobs left and right. Very credible news sites are going away, literally. Like, where are we supposed to find credible news? And then like, I think with the verified checks on Twitter going away, like, I think this is also like not a good thing, because it's like there are a lot of journalists who use those check marks as like they're coming to Twitter to like report hard news. And now it's like, well, how do I know I can really trust you? How do I know you're the real journalist? Like, again, I think it plays into this idea of trust. It plays into this idea of surveillance that we're seeing across the board. I don't know. I just wanted to call these things out.
I think that's like a really, really good point. And like, we've seen on Twitter, like journalists leading up to this happening, discussing like how Elon Musk like wants to control the media in whatever way he can. And like Elon Musk's like dislike of media, and how he basically is doing, like, he basically is took the blue check marks away, because he's like, fuck you guys. You didn't believe in me. You didn't write about me, whatever. Like, and that's kind of why this has happened in a lot of ways. And so it's so frustrating to see, and we've touched upon this before about like the decline of media literacy and people's willingness to like read full articles and like go beyond just reading a headline. And I think that this is going to lead to so many more issues in regards to like people believing like fiction is fact and that fact is fiction.
Yes, I agree.
And that is what makes me very scared, because most people who are more educated on like the world of social media and like understand what's going on in that regard, we're not going to be using Twitter in the same way we once were. But there are so many people who use Twitter who aren't like as on the up and up on and like educating themselves on what exactly this means in regards to social media and what this means in regards to news. And so those people are still going to be getting on their soapboxes, that whatever that they have, like, to be like, well, who are you anyway? When it could be like a fucking Pulitzer Prize winning journalist that's reporting stuff still on Twitter, just because that's what they're used to doing, or because like people still use the platform. So you can't just completely stop. And so it's just going to be scary for like the world of fake news.
And also, the government is literally considering banning TikTok from America.
Yeah. Which is another scary thing, because it does very much feel like, especially because when you watch that trial with the CEO of TikTok, like most of the people who were asking the rude questions, fighting against him, were more conservative Republicans. And so it feels very much like, oh shit, the people are getting information that we don't want the people to get. And that's what's scary, because it feels again like this surveillance state era.
If you guys happen to be into astrology, or like want to find out more, I personally have like a favorite astrologer who talks about astrology in the context of like what is happening with American politics. Mm-hmm. Her name's Jessica Lanyadoo, and her podcast is called Ghosts of a Podcast. And she literally talks about, like, in her like year forecast at the beginning of the year, she'll talk about the astrology for the whole year. She was talking about how in the coming years, we're going to see a lot of things happening in relation to surveillance, in relation to technology. And it's like already played out to be so accurate. So I know astrology is not for everyone. If you're into it, I am. I would recommend listening to her. She also like has some comforting words of wisdom if you're someone who is also super freaked out about the world.
I mean, I think I'll take anything at this point, really. Like, just to try and make sense of things. Like, if there's something that truly feels like it's helping make sense of stuff, like, why not? Why not? It's really all I can say. So like Jenna said, it's important for us to like acknowledge what is going on in the news of America and just like international social media news, since these are all relevant things to like topics we discuss in the podcast. And so with all of that being said, it is time for the meat of the episode with everything that's been going on lately. The first topic of which is Frank Ocean's Coachella set and kind of just like the discourse that happened following suit. Because for those of you who might not have been following Coachella or paying any attention to like pop culture reporting this past week, Frank Ocean was the very anticipated headliner for the last night of weekend one of Coachella, and this was announced in like 2019 for 2020 Coachella, which obviously didn't happen because of COVID. And Frank Ocean is like very known for like not doing a lot of performances, and this was a very big deal for his fans. And so news started coming out from the Coachella camp that Frank Ocean's set was running late. I was seeing TikTok videos like while this was happening, which I do think is really interesting in the fact that we do talk about like the way TikTok is changing the world of media. Is like we were getting live access news from people on the ground who are just normal concert goers, just let it like keeping people updated, like, oh my god, what is happening? And so Frank was an hour late to his set, and from the content I was being fed on my For You page and on Twitter, it seemed like the people of Coachella were pissed that he was late. And then he came on the stage and apparently utilized like maybe 20 square feet of like this massive stage. People were saying that like if you weren't in the right area, you couldn't even see him. You could only see him on like the main screen. I saw one TikTok where somebody was convinced that Frank Ocean wasn't even on the stage because of like what they were seeing as a fan in the crowd. And there were lots of videos after the fact kind of complaining about the fact that like he had like a DJ play his most popular songs and he didn't even sing them live. He was just kind of vibing to them on the stage, and that like his energy levels were all around quite low and he just like didn't seem that excited to be there. And fans were just like, what is this? And so it's interesting also because like I'm not a big like Frank Ocean fan. Like I don't know a lot about like the Frank Ocean lore or his background or anything like that, but what I do know, just as somebody who exists in the world of the music industry, is that like Frank Ocean is an artist, he's not a performer. And so I didn't really know what people were expecting, and so I kind of just assumed that the people whose videos I was seeing on my For You page were like general public fans, like people who knew his singles and didn't know anything else. That's why he was getting that response. And so that was like my experience, and we're going to talk about this a bit more. But Jenna, I know that you kind of experienced this news in a different way.
Yeah, so this was all happening Sunday when I was like at my own concert. So I didn't even know any of this went down until my intern on Monday morning on work was like, did you see what happened with Frank Ocean? And I was like, no. And then she sent me a Billboard article that was overwhelmingly like really positive. So it was like, I don't understand like why there's issues. Like one of the headlines in this Billboard article was that the setup was deceptively intimate. And then he reimagined his most beloved songs. And like there was a rave intermission and it worked. So like I read a review of the concert, but like it was all positive. So I was like, what is going on? And then I saw this tweet from this account called The Festive Owl. And it was basically saying like, I've been speaking with sources on exactly what transpired and how things went down. So here you go. And it was talking about like the stage production. He was supposed to have this like ice rink with like skaters performing on it. And at the last minute he pulled the plug and like the stage crew had to like melt the entire ice rink before he was able to perform. And that's why he was late. And then like an inside source said that it didn't seem like he wanted to be there. It seemed like he was obliged to be there. So like this is like all the information I have. And like, of course, this Festive Owl is like an anonymous source, but also like this tweet had 4 million views. So like, I don't know, do with that information what you will. But this is like what I saw before any of the like actual articles started to come out. So it's like, overall, I'm just very confused at what's going on. And it wasn't until like Sarah and I started discussing this more that like pieces started to fall into place.
Yeah, because I think I remember I texted you and I was like, oh my god, people are like pissed off about this, and you were like, DM me the Billboard article, and you're like, this seems like everybody's happy. And I was like, no one that I've seen has been happy.
I know.
But it is interesting because I hadn't seen that tweet about the ice rink, but I did see a Rolling Stone article that was titled, "Want to hear how Frank Ocean's Coachella set fell apart? Checks notes, hockey podcast has the details," which I just thought was very funny. And this is written by John Blastein for Rolling Stone. And so there's literally this hockey podcast called Empty Netters who spoke to somebody and found out about how like they had hired all these ice skaters to be like skating on an elevated surface during the performance, and that they had a month's worth of rehearsals for all of this, and that it was going to be like Frank hanging out and then skaters hanging out and like figure skaters doing their whole thing, and it was gonna be like this whole process. And I just like can't believe he pulled the plug. But I mean, in other articles from Rolling Stone since then, like his team has said that he suffered like an ankle injury and that was why he changed his mind. But it also kind of seems like it was a pretty last minute mind change for the fact that it like delayed the set a whole hour.
And the other thing was that he pulled the plug on it being live streamed. Like, it was supposed to be on the Coachella official YouTube live stream.
Yeah.
And then, like, I think it was like 2 hours before the plug on that was pulled. And so then even fans on the internet are mad because they were like, I was going to watch the YouTube live stream and now I can't.
Yeah. I did think that was like a really interesting choice. And I'm really curious as to like why, because that hasn't been addressed in any way as to like what his thought process was behind that. All I can think of, again, from like context clues based off what people have said, is that like I don't think Frank even views himself as a performer. And so I think maybe he just like didn't want to be perceived. But the most interesting thing to me out of this whole set was that during the set, he addresses the crowd and he goes, "I want to talk about why I'm here, because it's not because of a new album." And he's like, not that there's not a new album. So he's like, you know, flirting with the crowd. But he went on to say that the decision for him to headline the festival was really connected to his brother, Brian Bro, who tragically passed away in a car accident in 2020 at just the age of 18. So they had like a very big age gap between them, but the two were still very close. And so Frank told the crowd, "My brother and I came to this festival a lot. I feel like I was dragged by him sometimes because I didn't want to get a respiratory infection. I would always come here, and one of my fondest memories is watching Race Rumored with my brother and Travis Bennett in that tent." He continued on by saying, "I know Ryan would be so excited to be here with all of us. I want to say thank you for the support and the years and the love all this time. Now I'll get back to the songs." And so this man is clearly grieving. This man also, I think, like, again, based off of just reading articles and like fan responses, is like he clearly suffers from depression like most of us do. And I feel like America, no matter how much we are moving into like the direction of being more accepting and understanding about mental illness and depression and anxiety and all these issues, I think also we're kind of programmed to just be very like capitalistic in nature and like expect people to just kind of like get over it and do their fucking jobs just in regards to anything when it comes to like grief or mental health issues or even sickness. Like people like even still to this day, like, "Oh, you work remote and you're sick, sign on," you know, that kind of thing. And so it seemed like there was like genuine fans of Frank's were kind of going through the like acceptance and grieving process at the same time in regards to like what happened with the performance and how it felt like they got the short end of the stick with it and how it felt like he didn't want to be there and like that it wasn't his best work and all that sort of thing, where it's like, I understand he's going through so much, but also like, why did he do that to me personally? How dare he?
Yeah. Yeah.
And so it's that interesting thing. And I feel like this is, again, something that we talk about a lot in like our past deep dive episodes about like the parasocial relationship of it all and like what fans expect from artists at the end of the day.
If you think about Coachella, it is the most famous festival in America, and honestly, probably one of the most famous festivals in the world. So the stakes are really high, no matter what way you look at it, of like, Coachella is the festival where like if an artist is going to do something crazy, like it's going to happen at Coachella. So there's a lot of pressure from the regard of it being Coachella, from it being a headlining set. And then so fans are automatically expecting a lot. Mm-hmm. The fact that he hasn't performed in a long time, fans are now expecting a lot. And I think all of this coupled like with the fact that he has a very personal story related to like being at Coachella, it obviously was always going to be a difficult time for him to come on stage and actually do this.
Yeah.
I feel like most of the general public would not know that background story about his brother and like his experience going to Coachella. So like a lot of people aren't going to have that in mind when they're disappointed about the set.
Yeah.
But I'm sure like if you are a big fan, like you would know this. So it's like, it just feels like, and like from what you're saying, Sarah, and from what like I've read on the internet, it feels like people weren't approaching this with like grace or like with empathy or anything for him. They were just like, I paid money to be here, why aren't you delivering?
Yeah.
And we did have in a Rolling Stone like article that Larissa Paul did talking about this situation, she pulls a quote from the fan update account called Frank Ocean Daily with over 100,000 followers, who wrote, "This fan base is used to receiving crumbs, but that doesn't mean we should accept those crumbs as good and act like we're grateful for them. Frank confirming a new album is on the way doesn't justify the rest of his actions last night." And then they go on to say, "The fans deserve a genuine show from him. What they got was abysmal, and I'll say it, pretty disrespectful. People paid a lot of money, and what they got was lip-syncing, chaotic mess. Listen to the folks who were actually there." I think, Sarah, like also what you're saying is like this dichotomy between like, he's a human being, we need to have compassion and empathy for him, versus I'm paying money to be here. Like, this is a transaction.
Yeah.
You need to perform services for me.
Yeah. Like, the thing that was so interesting to me also was, like, I was seeing a lot of videos on TikTok of people who weren't at Coachella talking about this and being like, if Frank wasn't ready, he should have pulled out. And it's like, that's not how this works. Like, he has a contract with Coachella. He couldn't pull out. Like, that wasn't an option. I sometimes think that fans forget that, like, the music industry is an industry, like, that it is a job at the end of the day. And I think that, like, it's just really interesting, just like how specifically, like, American audiences react towards their favorite artists and react towards artists in general and like their expectations from those artists, and how it's kind of like, no, we pay your bills is really what it feels like. And it's just frustrating because it's like, he did the best he could for like somebody who is struggling and felt obligated to do a job because he signed contracts and understood that like, this is a job, even though I am an artist, you know? It was really jarring for me to see just like how negative of a response it was, because it's not like he didn't show up. It's not like he literally was like, no, I'm not doing this, or like came on the stage and was like, I came on stage, bye, which like he genuinely could have done, you know? And he didn't do that. Like, he still did this performance even with all the grief that he was feeling, because like I had a lot of personal loss in my life last year, and like just the thought of like doing something like having to do something that like I feel like would have been something that like my grandma would have like wanted to experience with me. Like, I don't even know how I would do that, you know? And like, I can only imagine when, again, like just based off of what I read in these Rolling Stone articles, it seems like Frank was very inspired by his younger brother, that he's written songs about him or based like roughly about him, that they had a very close relationship despite the fact that Frank was like 13 or 14 years older than him. So like, I can't even imagine like performing at your dead brother's favorite festival when like, if COVID hadn't happened, his brother would have been there for it. Like, I can't imagine what that would have been like, because his brother didn't pass away until August of 2020. So like, I can't even imagine like getting the news that you're going to perform at Coachella, your brother's favorite festival in the whole world, while your brother's alive, planning that festival, planning that performance, probably with your brother, because you're like, he's gonna be there to see it, and then it not happen, and then him tragically pass away, like in a very tragic way, and then 3 years later have to do that performance that like he should have been there for. Like, I can't imagine that. And like the lack of grace that I'm seeing, it's like, I understand the disappointment. I completely get it. Like, we're only human. Like, you're gonna feel some form of grief in regards to like the fact that you're missing out on something that you feel like deserving of because you paid for it. But it's like, he's just a human too. Like, I can't blame him.
I think it makes a lot of sense, because like, I also think some people might be like, oh, that was 3 years ago, like, aren't you over that? And it's like, everything you just explained about like how close they were, like how they would have been planning this together. And honestly, like, there was a Coachella last year in 2022, so like waiting until this year, I also just agree that like, no matter when it happened, this was always going to be a very difficult show for him to give. And with that being said, and with everything being said about what happened weekend 1, he did pull out of weekend 2.
Yeah.
And Blink-182 is going to replace him. And then the statement that he gave regarding all of this was, it was chaotic. There was some beauty in chaos. It isn't what I intended to show, but I enjoyed being out there and I'll see you soon. Which I also am like, did he enjoy being out there? I don't know, because all the fans have been talking about is negative stuff. Like, who would know how he really felt about this?
Yeah. I mean, like, watching the performance, like, it looked like he was having a good time, but I think also, like, he was probably just trying to make the best out of a situation that he didn't want to be in. And I think it's just very nuanced, and, like, nobody is seeming to handle it with a nuanced point of view.
It is interesting because it's like what we say about fans being disappointed when they've put time and money and expectations into something and the artist is not delivering. But this was obviously like a very unique case because of the scenario of who he is as an artist, who he is as a person, and then the specifics like with his brother and with Coachella and whatnot. I think it was just like a combination of a lot of things, and I guess we'll see what plays out from here, really. But we do have another instance of grief to be talking about from the fangirl perspective. So again, just proceed with caution as you're listening to the rest of this conversation because it does involve death. So on April 19th, earlier this week, I logged onto Twitter to see the news that a K-pop idol had passed. And he was found in his apartment in Seoul by his manager. And as of right now, there's no confirmation that it was suicide, but the police said it did look like that. And now within the K-pop world, there have been a handful of suicides over the past decade. One of the most prominent ones that, like, honestly I see on my timeline a lot is discussing Jonghyun from SHINee, who passed in 2017. And it's never something you want to log on to see the news about. I think with Western artists, like, we haven't really had a young artist pass away in a while. I mean, like, the thing that comes to mind is like Mac Miller, and of course, there was Amy Winehouse, but it feels very surreal, and I'm going to attempt to, like, unpack my thoughts and just honestly give, like, an open discussion from, like, a fan perspective of everything I've seen and what we've perceived as fans, what we've experienced as fans. And I think it's worth noting that, like, the K-pop community, as far as, like, the idols themselves go, is a very relatively small pool of people. It'd be, like, probably, I would relate it to, like, going to a high school of, like, 1,000 people, where it's, like, you relatively know who everyone is, and it's like, if you're not directly friends with someone and someone you know probably is friends with them. So when someone passes, like, even as a fan, if you, like, weren't directly, like, a stan, you probably watched their content at some time, or you probably heard their song, or maybe you even stan another artist who was friends with them. Mm-hmm. And so, like, the immediate reaction that I saw, like, on my timeline was, number one, logging onto TikTok, and the very first video that I got on my For You page was a video of Moonbin, who's the artist who passed, from the band Astro. And it was like their most recent TikTok dance video of Moonbin and one of his members. And like everyone in the comments was blowing it up naturally. And like it had been obviously been posted like several days ago. And so everyone was commenting like after it had already been posted, saying like RIP and all this stuff. And then I log onto Twitter and like people again are like giving condolences and posting threads, and I saw a lot of people posting like compilations or videos of like their favorite idol having interactions with this person. So like from 17, there's Seungkwan, who was really close with him, and there's a video of him like FaceTiming them FaceTiming together and like joking together and laughing together. And then I also know like later I saw Yeonjun from TXT was friends with him as well, and TXT is doing promotions in Japan and they were on TV and Yeonjun wasn't there, and so we're all assuming that he's going to his funeral. Moonbin also had a younger sister, Moon Sua, who's in the group Billy, and Billy like said they're pausing all like promotions for like the next few weeks. So it's very, very like weird and surreal, I think, particularly in K-pop, because their image is everywhere, like, but more so than Western artists. Like, there's just so much content with these artists, and so to me, when someone passes, and like I haven't been in the K-pop community when a death has occurred, like this is the first one for me. I like did a lot of like deep dives and like researching and what had happened in the previous deaths that happened, but the consuming of the image is so wild to me. And I know that everyone's going to process this differently, but for me, like immediately seeing so many images of this person is like almost like very upsetting to me. I'm like, why are we, because there always is going to be like a bit of a capitalist undertone to it. And I know that's not people's intentions of like them being able to grieve is them celebrating this artist. And of course, this has happened when Amy Winehouse passed, like when David Bowie passed, like people are going out in the streets and making memorials and like having celebrations. I don't know. It's just like has been a lot to consider, a lot to unpack. And I think the other thing as a fan is thinking like, what if this happened to my favorite idol? Like, what if this happened to my old person? And just like the general helplessness of like knowing someone might be going through something and you have no idea.
Yeah. I mean, last summer on the podcast, we did a deep dive episode called Grieving as a Fangirl from Death to Disbandment and talked about like the different layers of grief as somebody who is a super fan of an artist or a band. And like we touched on a lot of the things that Jenna has already said. And I think it's one of those things where like when something like this happens, it's really hard to know how to react properly because of like parasocial relationships and judgment and just the way people are in the world. And everybody grieves differently. And it's hard, especially in the world of K-pop when there is so much access to these artists, and the parasocial relationship, it goes both ways so strongly where like these artists feel as strongly towards the fans as the fans feel towards them as individuals. But obviously it's different because the artists view their fan base as like a conglomerate, as like a group of people, whereas like the fans view each member of the groups as like singular humans. So the parasocial relationship can never be an 100% equal thing. And so I feel like while this is something we talked about in that grief episode of the podcast from last year, while we can grieve Western artists, like if something terrible were to happen to Harry Styles, like Harry Styles wouldn't think of me before doing something to himself if he was like depressed and wanted his life to end. And like I don't expect him to think of me. Whereas I think that like in some senses, based off of like what I've seen about how K-pop stars talk about their fan bases, it's completely possible and like not unlikely that like these K-pop stars would be thinking about their fan bases in the same way they might be thinking about like, oh, like what would my family do without me? And like obviously it's speculation, you know, but it would be completely warranted for like that to be a discussion for fans to be having, like how much like pain this artist must have been in to do this, and like hoping that like they didn't go thinking that like they disappointed their fans and like all of that stuff. And like that's not like an out of pocket thing for fans to think. And like I just like personally could never imagine like what the grieving process must feel like to be part of a fan base that is so mutually parasocially connected as the world of K-pop.
I think also too like the layer that is so upsetting is, and of course this death hasn't been confirmed as suicide, it's suspected, hasn't been confirmed, but like it feels like with Western artists like there's been overdoses, there've been like tragic accidents. I mean, there has been a handful of suicides with like Chester Bennington from Linkin Park, but I don't know, there have been a handful of suicides within K-pop, and it feels like the grieving for a suicide versus the grieving for like a tragic accident feels different. Yeah. Because you know that person must have been going through something awful. And I'm not trying to like negate either one in any way, but like thinking about it from a fan perspective, it feels very heavy. It feels very hard to grasp and to grapple with. Mm-hmm. And I did see this fan tweet that has like over 7,000 retweets. And honestly, a lot of these tweets were coming from all fandoms. Like everyone was tweeting about this, like every fandom was tweeting about this. But this fan tweet said, "I hope in a way we can save our idols like how they saved us." Mm-hmm. And I was talking about this with one of my K-pop friends, and she was basically saying like, it's so sad that like we can't be there for them in the same way that like they're there for us. As much as we want this relationship to be mutual, the parasocial relationship only goes so far. But like idols are in a position that costs so much and takes so much of who they are and like their livelihood and what they do. And like at the end of the day, all fans want is for the idols to always be happy. And like the idols give us like so much love and so much happiness, and like they deserve to have a happy life. And it feels like fans take it personally in the regard of like we couldn't be enough for them almost.
Yeah. And I think also like the fans have like an even bigger understanding of like how much work these K-pop idols put into like making the fans feel seen and heard, and like how much work they put into their careers and like all of this stuff. And so it's like, I'm aware that every fandom has like its toxic factions, you know, like I'm not saying that the world of being a K-pop fan is perfect in any regard, but I feel like there seems to be a deeper understanding of like how much these K-pop stars like sacrificed for their jobs, which is like a huge difference between like what I was saying with like the lack of nuance when it came to like what happened with Frank Ocean's set. Is just like based off of the response that like I've seen from like what Jenna shared with me about the loss of Moonbin, like it seems like the fans are viewing him more like a human, and like that he was a human that had like feelings. And so there seems to be a lot more nuance and understanding of like what's going on here. And like if it is a suicide, like people are being very thoughtful in their response to this loss, and like not jumping to conclusions and not being hateful. And it's just a lot of like celebration of his life and a lot of like sadness towards the fact that like the fans couldn't do more for him.
Yeah, I mean, whatever side of K-pop Twitter I'm on, I see a lot of posts frequently about Jonghyun from SHINee, and like every year on his birthday, his members will post about him and like post a photo and post a sentiment about him. And in a way, like it's so crazy, like the members want to share and celebrate him with fans as much as fans want to like share and celebrate him. And Key, one of the members from SHINee, went and commented on like Moonbin's latest post, essentially giving his condolences as well, and just like, I hope you're in a better place, etc. And I like lost it so much reading that comment, because it's like, I think also like navigating that situation, if you're one of the like members in that band, it must be so incredibly difficult. And when this happened with SHINee, it was very public. Everything about it was very public. The funeral was very public, not inside the actual like ceremony, but like the entering and exiting of the funeral was very public. There's video footage you can watch of like SHINee members and other idols attending this funeral and just like sobbing, and it is heartbreaking to watch. And part of it is like, I feel like there's two sides to this conversation, which is like we should respect their privacy and maybe not be at the fans should maybe not be at the funeral filming, but I understand the other side of it, which is like fans feel so deeply close to this person that they just lost as well.
Yeah.
And I can understand why fans would want to see the reactions of the fellow members and the fellow idols, to feel like they're there, to see their reactions, to see their emotions, to feel like they're also part of this. And there's just, and then like when SHINee had their comeback concert, like after like a certain period of time, and then they were singing a tribute song, and it was like so heartbreaking, like they're all crying on stage, and it's very much a communal grieving together experience. It has been very interesting watching all of this with SHINee in retrospect of everything.
It's a whole different world, and I think that that's also like what we talked about in the past, like when we have covered K-pop, of just like how the K-pop idols' relationship with their fans is something that Western artists could never replicate, because K-pop, like they know that it's a job and they're thankful to be there, whereas like most of the discourse around more Western musicians is like, I'm an artist who just got successful, and like they don't necessarily view what they're doing as a job in the same way as like K-pop idols do, and like know that there's like an expectation, like even just going into it. And like I'm not saying that the love they feel for their fans isn't real, because there is that expectation, like it's obviously very genuine and real. It's an interesting thing to watch from like the outside, and it's very hard to watch like fan bases grieving. I mean, like in the grief episode again that we did last year, like it was a couple months after Tom from The Wanted had passed away from cancer, and that was like something that we knew was going to happen. And I mean, if you listen to it, I'm literally like crying in the episode, because it was just like so hard. And I think that like the closest thing I personally have ever gotten to like feeling that like kind of reciprocal parasocial relationship, I think, was with The Wanted, because they were like a boy band that was like very much on the ground with their fans. Like you could meet them no matter where you were, and like they were relatively big, you know.
And I think for you, like probably you had somewhat of a similar experience with Tom from The Wanted, because then didn't they do like a tribute show, like a final?
Yeah, so they did a final tour with him where he, like, they basically got back together because they knew he was going to pass, and so they went on tour, and so that he could experience that again. And so you have like these final shows where like he was really at his sickest, and he's like sitting on a throne, and they're like essentially like eulogizing him like live while he's there, which is like hard to watch. And then like, I mean, since then, like one of his fellow members, Siva, like did this show called like, I think it's like Celebs on Ice. It's like dancing on ice with celebrities. It's ridiculous, but it was like, oh, like you do a performance for like for someone that meant something to you, and they have this song called Gold Forever, which was like had been like a love song and kind of turned into like the song for Tom. And so they like did like an ice dance to that song, and it was like so hard to watch like him talk about like how much Tom meant to him, and like how they need to keep his memory alive, and then like do this like beautiful like ice skate, because like I mean ice skating is a gorgeous art form, and so just like watching them do this, and it's just like it's so crazy. And so it's just interesting because that's like the closest thing I think I will ever get to like experiencing like a similar thing where the band is trying as hard as they can to like make the fans feel involved in something that like they also know is like deeply personal to themselves. And like even Tom's wife, like they did like a separate event where like fans were not invited to the funeral, but they had like a separate funeral thing for fans to go to, because they knew that like the fan relationship with Tom meant as much to Tom as it meant to the fans. And so that like the parallels I think are just really interesting, because like there have been other artists that I've been a fan of who have passed away in various different ways, and like I've never seen like that happen in the same way.
As I was talking earlier, it very much brought up the story that like you had shared when we did this episode last time, and it feels very much the same of like the artists wanting the fans to be part of it, and like knowing that the fans deserve that. And I think honestly part of it is it being a boy band. Like they all know how important that is, and like the fact that we've seen a lot of like solo artists pass. It's like if it's a solo artist, like their family or their direct friends can never really understand that parasocial relationship, and so fans might not get as much from it as this instance with The Wanted, where like they very much were like the fans need to be part of this.
And that seems like relatively similar like with these K-pop situations like in past, and like it'll be interesting, and I know interesting feels like a cold word to use in regards to death, but I think it will be interesting to see like how the two groups that Moonbin was a part of like handle this going forward, because especially like what you were saying about Shiny, where like they did like a tribute to like essentially their lost brother, because that's like really what it's like, and like trying to like give fans something so that the fans know that the group knows that like they are also grieving and that they're a part of this, and like trying to like let the fans know like, yes, like we see you, we hear you, we're sharing in this grief, and that's okay.
It feels very significant. It feels very significant to like acknowledge this, that like fans, for you, those of you listening, fans are very much part of this, and like to have that recognition from an artist or from an artist peer, like acknowledging that feels very significant as a fan.
And that was like the main point of like our grief deep dive episode that we did, was like trying, and I think like if you haven't listened to it, or even if you have, it might be helpful to revisit it, just because like it is so important for fans to know that it's completely acceptable to be grieving. I mean, obviously, like I feel like you guys can hear the changes in Jenna and my voices while discussing this topic, is like this is hard even for us. It's difficult, and there's nothing to be ashamed of for like feeling human emotions in regards to somebody whose music has affected you and like life has affected you, because especially with K-pop, like we said, like they do so much for their fans, and it's like they fully feel like part of your life.
I will try to end this on a positive note, which is that our friend and journalist Tamar Herman has a newsletter called Notes on K-pop that I've been subscribed to, and she did a newsletter this week remembering Moonbin. So I'm just going to read from her newsletter a little bit. She says, "In Judaism, we don't say rest in peace. We say, may their memory be a blessing. So here are some of mine that I'm thinking a lot about since I heard the news, both recent and otherwise. They're providing me some comfort and perspective amid this tragedy, and I hope it will do the same for you, readers. And I hope today and every day after is kind to you. And so Tamar goes on to list like a few of her memories, being a fan of Moonbin, being a fan of Astro, seeing them in real life, getting to interview them. And then towards the end, Tamar writes, more recently, I launched this newsletter's 5-minute focus audio interviews with Moonbin and Sanha sharing their thoughts on scents in line with their incense release. I can't bring myself to listen to it, but since I heard the news, I kept thinking of one of the quotes about Moonbin's hope for the album. He said, I've always thought of a scent as a medium for memories, and we built this album's concept around scent, hoping our album to become a medium that takes listeners back to their memories. On top of that, now I want to add another meaning to the word incense, eternal. I think going back to the past and reminiscing can be done anytime, and any memory can be everlasting. And this quote just hurts so bad.
Oh
like, I know. I'm like, this is... Yeah.
That like got me right in the. I mean,
yeah.
Wow. But also just like thinking now, just in regards to like what happened, it's like it feels like this is somebody who's like really thinking about like
deeply
like life and like what you leave behind. But I think like most people can relate to that because like scent is, you know, it's a very powerful thing.
So thank you guys for joining us for this episode. If you guys are going through any type of grief or any type of fangirl grief and you just want to come share some thoughts, we are always available over on Instagram and would love to share some memories with you because at the end of the day, we're all going through this together and your feelings as a fangirl mourning are very extremely valid.
Yeah. Grief of any kind is not something you should ever have to feel guilty for feeling.
Alone.
Or alone.
Yeah, or alone.
Yeah, 100%. So come hit us up on socials if you have any thoughts or feelings about this episode. We're at Name 3 Songs on all platforms, or you can come chat with us personally if you have any thoughts or feelings you'd rather hash out with us one-on-one. I'm at Sarah_Fagan and Jenna is at Jenna_Million. So thanks for joining us on this episode in Name 3 Songs, and until next time, never let anyone make you feel bad about your favorite band.
And remember, you're never too cool to listen to Rosalia.
Don't forget to subscribe to be notified when each episode comes out and leave us a 5-star review. They really help.
If you want to find out more about any of the sources we referenced in this episode, you can visit name3songs.com.